Buy or sell late season league winners for 2025, and can we actually trust them to carry that production into 2026? I am breaking down guys who really popped in the second half of the season. We will look at what their ADP is going to look like in 2026, and is the juice worth the squeeze? Let me know in the comments, do you buy or sell these players for 2026? Can we actually make this video and not talk about Kyle Pitts? I don't think so. I think he is the quintessential player for this type of list. Because Kyle Pitts was definitely a tale of two seasons. Luckily for him, the second half of the season existed because the output in the first half of the season was not exactly one that was worthy of a big contract payday in a contract season for him. In the first half of the season, he did have some moments, a couple of top 10 finishes, but nothing particularly fancy. Weeks 1 through 9, he was tied in 14, averaging 8.2 fantasy points per game and half PPR, then cut to the back half of the season. A good improvement for him. Overall, tied in 3 in average fantasy points per game, averaging 11.2 fantasy points per game. But really, the most impressive outing was that crazy 166 yards, 3 touchdowns game against Tampa Bay. So from weeks 13 through the end of the season, he only had one game that was not a top 12 finish. That was a game against the LA Rams. They do tend to be not so tight end friendly. Overall, back half of the season, excellent here. So the big question that we have is whether or not he will remain in Atlanta. Unfortunately, since we got an entire regime change at both coach and GM, it's not super easy to predict whether or not they will actually retain him. I mean, we'll know here soon, right? Even if he does go elsewhere, though, considering the upside that he's shown, regardless if he's Atlanta or somewhere else, he is probably going to be drafted as a top 10 tight end. If he goes somewhere else, maybe even higher, right? So for me, between buy and sell, I'm sorry, he is actually a big sell for me. I'm sorry, I can't get on board with it. I know the upside is extremely high. And he has an incredible ceiling, right? He's extremely talented. Obviously, regardless of the location, he will be changing offensive systems, so that is a positive. But unless he goes to an offense, like let's say I could get on board if he went to an offense with Kevin Stefanski. Not that I don't like him in any way, shape, or form, but if he went to an offense with Kevin Stefanski that heavily favors tight ends, that's a completely different story. Otherwise, if he's playing second fiddle to a strong running back and an excellent wide receiver one, I just really don't think that he'll be worth it again from the fantasy perspective, and it'll be more like the first half of the season, unfortunately. Alec Pierce spent 2026 showcasing exactly why the Colts felt very comfortable shipping off Adonai Mitchell. He is an extremely dangerous deep threat, and as long as the quarterback has an arm, somewhat of an arm, Alec Pierce is coming down with it. He showed incredible upside with multiple games over 20 fantasy points, despite being in extremely questionable quarterback situations. I definitely buy Alec Pierce. I won't bury the lead. I buy him the talent, right? But the only issue that I have is that provided the Colts do bring him back, and I do think that they will bring him back, it is tough for him to get that level of volume necessary to consistently be a high-end wide receiver too, meaning that 2026 is likely leaning towards another boom-bust type of year. But as I look at the early rankings, and this is why he is more of a buy for me here, as I look at the early rankings, I don't think that where we're going to draft him, if he actually has some bust games, that it's going to actually be a problem for our fantasy lineups. The best that he can probably end up in terms of rankings and ADP is wide receiver 40. He is literally going to be a double-digit round pick with an extremely high known and proven upside. At this point, we have more than enough evidence to know that he can command targets with the right quarterback. And that's what makes this shift a little bit more towards trusting him as well. Because while he can be very boom bust, we saw him earlier in the season with Daniel Jones where he had multiple double-digit target games, had a nice little solid floor there that was shifting for a second. Now, it's obviously very important to note that while he did have double-digit targets, those were still extremely high yardage games. His role is a deep threat. That is his role. But seeing the way that he can take the top off of a slate literally at the end of the season is what really sold me on him. He will be the type of player that you will draft because you know that he has league winning upside. You're getting an actual winner on your bench, not somebody who's going to be a plug-in and maybe he gets us 8-9 fantasy points. No, he's a guy that you can put in when you know that you need upside here. I have zero issue with Alec Pierce in 2026. Definitely buying. Someone brought up Luther Burden in my live show this week, and I think this is one that we're going to have to heavily think about this offseason. I had very little interest in Chicago's receiving core heading into 2025. The only person that I was somewhat interested in drafting was Rhamondre at his ADP. because he was not the first wide receiver off the board. That was DJ Moore. And at first it looked like a hit, looked like the right decision. And then he settled into exactly what I thought that every single wide receiver for Chicago was going to be in general. Just a consistency issue. Tough to trust on a week-to-week basis as long as the group stays as is. And I do think it is. There's just way too much going on here. First of all, you have an offense that is very intentional about the run. It's not a light it up through the air situation. This is an extremely well-balanced attack, and they will lean on their running backs when they need to. Second of all, we were talking about Rhamondre, DJ Moore, Luther Burden, Colston Loveland, even Cole Kmet. That's like a whole lot in terms of targets. And when you get into those situations where there's a whole lot, like we talked about previously in another video about Jacksonville, it's just difficult to pinpoint consistency there. So it makes it very difficult to take the highest receiver on the draft board, the guy with the highest ADP. And unfortunately, the problem here is that this year, that will definitely be Luther Burden. He will be drafted ahead of DJ Moore. He will be drafted ahead of Rhamondre. I fear, unfortunately, that he might be the DJ Moore of 2026 and might be a wee bit overdrafted. Now, the good news is that he was definitely the most consistent Bears receiver in the back half of the season. DJ Moore was extremely boom bust. Rhamondre was rather mediocre in terms of production when he actually was playing. So if there is hope for a wide receiver, I do think that the hope would be specifically for Luther Burden. But at his projected ADP, I do think I'm going to have to sell. It's got to come down a little bit for me to feel comfortable. Yes, we do have to talk about a Packers receiver, obviously. No Packers receiver will be drafted in the top 24 this season. I can almost guarantee that, which is good. That's good for us as fantasy managers because that means that we're not going to be overdrafting any of them. It's not going to be a problem there. They all ended the season healthy, so that's good. The caveat here for us is that Romeo Doubs is a free agent. We have to see if this receiving core can be reduced down a little bit. I don't particularly have a lean on whether or not they're going to try to keep them. Loyalty does make a lot of sense. They do like him. But at the same time, if he can go get money somewhere else, we've seen he gets very frustrated with lack of targets. And while he did have a strong finish to the season, if he sees an opportunity to go somewhere else to be a higher level wide receiver, I do think he will take it. So we might not be with Romeo Doubs as a Packers this season. And again, for our purposes, that's good. We need to weed people out and have one person actually step up. And while I do love Matthew Golden, and I do think the Packers underutilized him a little bit this season, I think that the wide receiver one they will to be the wide receiver one is Christian Watson. And to his credit, when he returned from the injury, he showcased as a true wide receiver one, despite the fact that he was not given wide receiver one targets that I do think he deserves. Outside of one outlier performance against Detroit where he had 10 targets, for the most part, we got Watson in that 4 to 6 target range, which is straight up not enough for him. And now he was able to be very productive with those targets and thrive in terms of touchdowns, but we need him to be utilized more. We need the Packers to commit to him because when he is healthy, he has showcased that the talent is there, the capabilities are there. We just got to get the targets to him. Now, when we're looking at his season in 2025, when he was healthy, the Packers eased in Christian Watson the first couple of games, and Week 10 was really the first game that he was on an elevated snap count. He averaged 11.5 fantasy points per game, making him wide receiver 17 on the season. Good for him. And that was above guys like Jamison Williams, Cortland Sutton, DK Metcalf. When you put it that way, it does make you feel a little bit more positive about him. We have never seen Watson in his 4 years with more than 66 targets in a single season. The ceiling is there. The capabilities are there. We got to get the targets to him. And we've never seen him utilized as a true wide receiver one throughout the season. A lot of that is not always intentional. A lot of that does have to do with injury. The max number of games that he has played in a season was 15 in 2024. He suffered multiple multi-week injuries and the significant injury last season as well. His health has been a constant concern. Our faith in him is truly whether or not we can trust him to play an entire season and whether or not we can trust the Packers to actually give him the targets that he deserves, or if they force him to stay in that 4 to 6 range. That said, I do think I buy it. They gave him an extension last season to get him through an additional season with the Packers. So this is a contract year for him. And unless something goes sideways during the off season, he should be healthy heading into the season. I think that he will be an excellent mid-round pick, someone that you're not going to have to overspend on, and he actually has a decent ceiling if we can get there with the targets, right? I think he did more than enough to separate himself from Jane Reed. I am buying in 2026. By my estimate, absolutely nobody wanted it to be this way, but Rhamondre Stevenson, to his credit, did look good this season. The numbers obviously don't show him as the lead back because Stevenson dealt with injury, and even when he was on the field, he was often not the one getting the most carries, but technically speaking, he was the starter, and he closed out the season extremely strong with 3 straight top 15 performances, and thus far has looked very good in the playoffs. Looking at the numbers, the logical progression is that Travion Henderson should be the lead back in 2026, and he is absolutely going to be drafted as such. He was definitely drafted as such last season. But when we're looking at Henderson, he will be drafted as the clear top 15 back here, despite the level of upside that Stevenson showed. Because Travion Henderson in his own right showed massive upside. And even when accounting for the missed games, he did receive more touches than Rhamondre Stevenson. He should theoretically be the lead back. Stevenson, on the other hand, he will be drafted as an RB3. He'll be drafted as a complementary back in the range of guys like David Montgomery, who is going to be dropping in ADP this season. Yep, we're no longer in the low-end RB2 season of David Montgomery. He is going on back. So he'll be drafted around guys like David Montgomery, Bashal Tootin, if Travis Etienne remains, guys like Ja'Cory, Krosky, Merritt. He will be a very interesting bench stash. I do not expect him to go away. I do not want you to draft him, as in you won't. You won't draft him as your RB2 there. But you got to remember, they did in fact pay this man. They do in fact like him, and they do in fact like to lean on the ground game, and it has been highly successful. So I buy him as a high-end complementary back and one of the best backups and theoretically running backs that you can draft and also have standalone value with extreme upside if his lead back were to go down. And quite frankly, perhaps even a little bit more than that. While optimism is definitely there that Travion Henderson just straight up takes away the backfield as a whole and Stevenson's role becomes even more reduced, I do think there's a good chance that this season 2026 is going to repeat exactly as it did in 2025, with it really being a 1A, 1B, and you never quite know exactly which one is going to have the more upside there. But the run game is so good that ultimately it doesn't really matter. So when you're looking at where you're going to be drafting him, he actually is probably going to end up for a decent value pick there. Words cannot express how insane this season was for a breakout season for Michael Wilson. We're talking about a man that finished as the overall wide receiver 20 in average fantasy points per game in half PPR, despite the fact that he literally did not finish better than wide receiver 41. Again, let me emphasize this. His best finish until week 11 was wide receiver 41, and he ended up as wide receiver 20 on the season. That's insane. Obviously, we know why he broke out. There's no mystery here. It was two-pronged, though. We cannot ignore that. The obvious one there, Marvin Harrison Jr.'s injury, but we cannot overstress the fact that this was also aggressively related to Jacoby Brissett. I do not think this would have happened with Kyler Murray at quarterback, just based off the evidence that we have seen, right? Because obviously, Michael Wilson was not the only one making a leap there. There was Trey McBride as well. Problem for us is, we don't know for certain what's going to happen here, but it's tough to imagine that Kyler Murray is going to be back with the Cardinals. Unfortunately, there are not a ton of options in terms of them finding a new starting quarterback. So the most likely scenario, unless they're able to, draft who they want in the first round, is that they find a day 2 quarterback that they like in the process and bridge him with Jacoby Brissett, who is still under contract for another year. So when we're looking at the receivers, assuming that we have Jacoby Brissett bridging a young quarterback to start the season, unless Marvin Harrison Jr. gets a new injury, he will in fact be healthy to start the 2026 season, which is where the issue arises for us. Wilson showed a level of upside that we have not seen from Marvin Harrison Jr. Like the volume that he commanded, the reliability that he had and showcased, the hands, like everything, the ability to truly take the top off of a week. I would like to say that Marvin Harrison Jr. could do that, but I just don't know if I trust him to be able to do that. Even when we did see strong overall performances from Marvin Harrison Jr. last year, in 2024, there were never massive high volume situations where he just commanded a ridiculous amount of targets and receptions, right? We had one reception where he had 130 yards and 2 touchdowns. Unfortunately, that was on 4 receptions, and all that production came in the first quarter. I'm not joking. So we've never seen a complete massive game from him where he thrived from endpoint to endpoint, right? To the level that Michael Wilson did with pure volume. So that's a little bit concerning there for Marvin Harrison Jr. It's entirely possible that this could be a 1A, 1B situation, and the difference in their rankings absolutely shows that most fantasy managers, most fantasy rankers think that's exactly what it will be. Marvin Harrison Jr. and Michael Wilson's rankings differentiator is very, very slim there. Harrison Jr. is being ranked as a low end wide receiver 3. Michael Wilson is being ranked as a high end wide receiver 4. There is literally like 4 or 5 spots of rankings between them right now, which is kind of scary. Because as much as I love Michael Wilson, that ranking is too rich for my blood because of the question marks that we have at quarterback. You know, at some point, do they transition to a rookie and things get a little shaky and they reduce volume? I just don't know if we're getting enough of a discount to really be able to draft him there. Because if he cannot surpass Marvin Harrison Jr. when he's healthy, Trey McBride exists. So that means that Wilson is naturally the third look in the offense, and we are drafting him in an area where you're drafting second looks, which is kind of a little bit shaky, right? So from a fantasy perspective, again, with the unknown quarterback situation, that just doesn't make a lot of sense, unfortunately. That said, I do think that we could see him move back in rankings a little bit because there will be rookies coming in here. They're not up there in the rankings yet. That will affect. And if we can push him back a little bit in ADP, I will feel more comfortable. If like we can get him in the Alec Pierce zone, that's where I would feel good in buying into Michael Wilson. But if he's tilting up there very close to Marvin Harrison Jr. in rankings, that's a little concerning for me. Before we wrap up, a couple of other guys that I went into a lot of detail in other videos, but I did want to touch on real quickly here. You can check out the other videos if you want more details on them. Jalen Coker's breakout back half of the season, I buy it. There's no questions around that, guys. I do think he's going to stay in Carolina. We discussed it before. I love the talent. I will be buying in again on Jalen Coker in 2026. And then Parker Washington as well. I buy him and his talent. There's no question about that. I think what we saw was that traditional third year breakout for young wide receivers, those young day 2, day 3 type of wide receivers that break out in year 3. Like, remember, Nico Collins had that. I'm not calling him Nico Collins, but Nico Collins had that progression as well. So I believe in that trope of wide receivers, and I do think that Parker Washington was one of them. The problem is that I don't buy that the Jags are going to let him remain a starter. There's just way too many mouths to feed. And for me to spin reality and think that they're going to bench, Brian Thomas Jr. or Travis Hunter for Parker Washington is just difficult. Now, we do have the caveat that the Jags have said that they will have Travis Hunter play both ways. So if that's the case, then that could be a nice little slide in for Parker Washington. But again, we're going to have to pay attention to it throughout this offseason because just so many mouths to feed. I don't like the situation, unfortunately, and odds of him going elsewhere, slim to none. He is in contract. They're all in contract, so we're in a weird situation with the Jags receivers. I don't know if I buy it. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. You can find me across all social media platforms at It's Steer Time, so make sure that you're locked in, tuned in, subscribe, turn on notifications. We are continuing to go strong through the off season, and coming up very soon, we're going to be having rookie profiles and free agency videos, so stick around.